everybody. Zach back here with another episode of Clutch Crew Sports. Unfortunately, there's a few things missing from my new profile screen here. Noticeably, crown and the trophy have gone away, but hey, it shows me off a little bit better, so that's good. But hopefully you guys like this episode we've got in front for you guys. We're doing another top 10 list. This will be our fourth edition of a top 10 series. And on it, we're going to be talking about college football rivalries, our favorite snack foods, and the greatest NFL teams of all time. So it should be fun. And there's definitely a couple head-scratching moments planned ahead as well. Now let me introduce you to the rest of the crew.
Yeah, what's up, guys? I'm Connor. I'm really excited to do a mostly all football-themed top 10 episode. It's going to be fun. I also recently, if you guys follow us each of us on Twitter, I recently got my new TJ Watt jersey from the Regulators podcast. Fits perfectly, and I'm ready to show it off. But I'm excited for this top 10 and especially to talk about the football.
What's going on, guys? Eric here, your ranting co-host. And I'm excited because I have the day off tomorrow.
That's a good thing to be excited.
I'm pretty stoked about that and glad that I was able to get off not too late tonight so I could be a part of this episode. Even though I'm the only one that hasn't won on Sports Jeopardy yet, I'm still maintaining my high spirits.
What's up, guys? It's Nate here. If you're watching on YouTube, you may notice something a little bit different about my slide there. Excited to have won Jeopardy last week. Having a good time with it until our next round. Hopefully, I can keep that picture up there for another round.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm coming back to put everybody in their place next time.
Oh.
And Connor's going to put like 18 things on his slide.
Yeah.
Watch out.
We'll see. I can't wait till I get to that point where I win 5 of them, so then I can put Booker T on my slide going 5 times.
Oh, he's already got it planned.
He's planning it out.
I gotta ask you, Nate, though, how long did it take you to do the Photoshop here? Was this a quick thing for you to do, or did you actually spend some time doing it? Because it looks pretty well done.
It really wasn't that bad. I have an app on my phone that that's why I made the other picture on my slide there of Jarrett Stidham, but it took me like a half hour maybe.
Oh, okay.
So a little project. I was bored. I was like, might as well.
Yeah.
Got nothing better to do, right?
Yeah. Sitting in the house, I was like, might as well.
All right, guys. Yeah. So we do have a top 10, like I said. It's football. It's a football heavy episode. So if you like college and NFL football, you should enjoy our list, as well as anybody who partakes in snacking, which I'm sure applies to everybody listening and watching. So got something for everybody because everybody knows snacks are important. Eric is especially fond of those, I know, so he's going to lead off that section. But we're going to start.
You make it sound like Eric's fat.
I know. As soon as I said that, I was like,
sometimes I wonder how I'm not, though, to be totally honest.
All right, so we've got the top 10 college football rivalries, and my list, you'll see there's definitely bias. I mean, there's going to be bias with everybody's list probably, but especially with my list, I decided not to be biased with Tennessee or USF or anything, and I left my favorite teams out of this list because I really thought they didn't deserve it. But the big bias that you'll see in my list is a theme of SEC teams, which I think I'll be able to justify. Sorry, Mark, SEC hater, Big Ten defender. that was Mark's nickname a couple months ago when we were talking. Him and I were talking about the how LSU and Ohio State should have been ranked in the standings and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, the SEC really dominates college football now. They set the example, and they have the most teams that are very good. I mean, there's good teams in every conference. All the Power 5 conferences have some historically great teams, but it seems like the SEC just has the most of those. And so starting off my list at number 1, it's got to be the Iron Bowl. Alabama and Auburn. I mean, these two teams always, every year, you watch the NFL draft and you see this guy picked from Auburn, this guy picked from Alabama. I mean, especially Alabama in the first round, but the Auburn players, they're there as well. And a lot of times the players playing at these two schools play in the same state. Obviously, they're proximity wise, that's a huge thing. When the state of Alabama is probably known most for college football, and it's obviously these two teams are the best at it. And another good thing about this rivalry, especially in recent years, is it's really been Auburn has been Alabama's toughest test basically for the past decade. I mean, if Alabama doesn't go undefeated, typically they lose at Auburn. And similarly, Auburn has had some very good years too. They won a national championship not too long ago. So these two teams have had recent success. It's a historical rivalry, been going on a long time. Obviously, this picture here of the kickoff return, or not kickoff, the field goal return was pretty historic moment and pretty craziness. But that sums up this rivalry. It's always high spirited. It's always competitive. And these two teams are great. So that's why I have that as the number one rivalry. Number two, I've got Alabama and LSU because this is another one of those rivalries with Alabama has where typically the winner of this game wins the SEC and at the very least wins the SEC West. Obviously, these two teams don't like each other at all. These games always seem to be defensive battles too, and a lot of Heisman Trophy winners have came out of these a great Heisman moments coming from these games. Just look at Joe Burrow last year. So also too, you have Nick Saban, who previously coached at LSU, who is now at Alabama. So that's another factor into this rivalry. It's just another Deep South rivalry that I think is with two of the best teams in the SEC. So that's number two on my list. Number three, going out of the SEC for this one, I've got Army and Navy, obviously.
What?
I mean, yeah, I mean, these two teams obviously aren't at the level currently as many of the teams on my list, but still, this is when many people think of college football, they think of this game. I mean, it has a whole week to itself, basically, at the end of the season before the conference championship games. It's basically the Army-Navy week. I don't even think any other games are played, which is pretty crazy. But the amount of people, this game, the amount of everybody has some connection to it too. Most everybody has some family members that are in the armed forces or were in the armed forces and either were in the Army or Navy. So it's one of those things that goes to everybody, even non-sports fans, I think. It's one of those things that kind of unites everybody. And it's also a positive rivalry. I mean, it's, these people are defending the country, so it's hard to root against either of them. But I know between the Army and Navy, they want to win this game. Obviously, it means a lot of pride, and it's one of those things that kind of transcends college football, and it's played because college football, but it's really a much greater than that. Then I've got Georgia and Florida here at number 4. This is a pretty massive rivalry game because they play annually in Jacksonville, which is where I live, obviously, and it's a huge event, man. It's crazy the amount of people that come to this thing. It really put Jacksonville sports scene on the map, I believe, back in the 80s and 90s and even 70s. So between the teams, Georgia and Florida, they've always had very, very successful teams for the most part. And this is another one of those instances where the winner of this game, especially now, typically wins the SEC East. And you see the rivalry is real, though, between Georgia and Florida. I mean, make no mistake about that. These two teams don't like each other. And the games are always close. I love watching these games. They're just always fun to watch in October. Then next, I've got Ohio State, Michigan, and some people are going to be like, oh, you should have them higher on your list. But in my lifetime, I've never watched an Ohio State, Michigan game that was really, really exciting. I mean, it seems like Ohio State's just dominated Michigan from what I can remember. So I know these teams obviously have a lot of great NFL players and whatnot, and this game gets played every year like all the others. But it's a rivalry. I'm giving it respect by putting it on this list, but my interest level in it is just not that high. So that's why I have it at number 4, I guess, or 5. And then I've got the Red River Showdown, Oklahoma and Texas here. This is the middle part of the country, often gets overlooked on these sort of lists, but I've got them here because this basically determines the winner in the Big 12. It's a classic rivalry. I don't know too much about either of these teams really historically, but they've both been very, very good. So it's also another one of those things where truly when they say, oh, throughout the records, it's a rivalry game. Throughout the records, it's a rivalry game. It doesn't matter how up or down either of these teams are. It's going to be fought evenly, which I think is a good characteristic for a rivalry game. And then I've got Florida State. This is a Sunshine State battle. I mean, Florida bias here, but when especially in middle school, I remember whenever rivalry week for college football came up, everybody would be wearing Florida or Florida State. I mean, that was the predominant favorite teams at the school I went to. But Nate, you'll know, it seems like everybody. It seems like everybody. You were either Florida or Florida State, and everybody showed it off at school. So I just know from where I live, especially in a city that's kind of in a crossroads between the two schools, that it's huge. But you get players too that come from Tallahassee that play for Florida, and vice versa. It's pretty crazy, the rivalry and the connection between the schools and players and the surrounding areas. So got that at number 7. And then number 8, I'm going out west here with the Holy War between BYU and Utah. This is one that I always knew was a highly spirited rivalry. I mean, it's called the Holy War, but it's really, this is kind of like the Army-Navy thing where it kind of transcends football, where it's like you have 7 generations of a family that all go to Utah, and then the one person that goes to BYU, it's like I've seen videos of this where like they have to get therapy that like they went to the rival, they went to BYU or they went to Utah, and their whole family and all their traditions have gone to one of these schools. So it's one of those where it's like really you really draw the line fine. But then I looked up some statistics on it, and this is interesting. I didn't see a reasoning for this, but both schools claim different all-time records. BYU says 6 games don't count for some reason. I don't know why they say that. I couldn't find an explanation, but Utah leads the series, obviously. And then I looked up some other infamous moments between the rivalry, and I wanted to share this because it was pretty funny. But so they were playing a game at BYU one year, and Utah had just scored a touchdown, and one of the cheerleaders ran across with a flag, like a big U flag, celebrating on a BYU sideline, or not in the BYU sideline, but just around BYU fans. And then a BYU fan jumped out of the stands and went and tackled the cheerleader, and then the cheerleader started punching the fan. It was just a whole big thing. And then one of the Utah players, I can't remember who he was, but he quoted, because they won that year. They said, "Even our cheerleaders are kicking your butts." So this is a highly contested rivalry. I think a lot of people don't know about because it's played earlier in the season. They're not in the same conference or anything, but yeah, it's spirited. It's a tradition thing, and it's been going on for a long time too. George, speaking of going on for a long time, Auburn and Georgia. This is another Deep South rivalry I have on my list. These two teams are geographically located really close to each other. I'd almost argue that Georgia is more of a rival to Auburn than Alabama is. Even though I've got Auburn ahead, I think Auburn fans want to win this game just as much or maybe more as the Alabama game. It's actually the second most played rivalry in FBS. It's a very competitive series. Georgia leads 60-56. And another thing too, the whole War Eagle nickname for Auburn actually originated in this game with a veteran who had an eagle fly up to him or something like that, and the War Eagle thing started during this game. And then just another statistic to kind of emphasize how dirty this rivalry can be is they keep this. I mean, they keep statistics for everything nowadays, but this one really, I was like, wow. So since 2006, apparently, this game between these two teams has averaged the most personal fouls with like 5.6 personal fouls a game. So that's pretty crazy to think about, almost 6 personal fouls in a game, but every time they play, which is just shows you how dirty these two teams can play against each other because they want to win that bad. And then I've got another sunshine rivalry down here between Miami and Florida State. This is another, it's kind of fallen off in recent years, but back in the 90s especially, this won the ACC, and so many of these Miami or Florida State teams ended up being national champions too. Jimmy Johnson, Bobby Bowden. And then another thing too about this, 3 of the 5 highest rated games on ESPN, college football games, were between Miami and Florida State. So this is another instance where you get players across the state being recruited by one school, maybe being snubbed by another. They have hatred towards. I mean, there's pure hatred between all these teams on here, but this one especially, I know Miami and Florida State fans have hatred for each other. So that's harsh, but it is what it is. You can see with these players, I'm sure they're not saying pretty things about each other on the screen here. So that's my top 10 list, and I'm interested to see some of your guys' list because they look different than mine, I'll tell you that. But we'll go with Connor next here to talk us through your list.
Yeah, so, well, unlike Zach, I do have a little bit of bias in this list, but in terms of favorite teams, but I kind of left those towards the bottom, so that way, I didn't put anything like, out of the blue at the top. So, but like Zach, I also have Alabama Auburn at number 1, and like Zach said, I mean, this is like, it seems like this is the rivalry game every year, because it seems like, especially like this year, for example, Alabama, they needed to beat Auburn. If they beat Auburn, they still had a chance of getting into the college football playoff. If they lost to Auburn, they were out. So this game, it really, and Zach was saying how the game between Alabama and LSU like decides the SEC West. This game almost is like the other game that will determine the SEC West every now and then, because Auburn always has lots of success. So and like Zach said, it's a historical rivalry. It's very competitive. I mean, kind of like for the Patriots in the NFL, like when they go to Miami, whenever Alabama goes to Auburn, something happens to them. They're a different team. Even they can be like the most dominant team in the league, in college football, and then somehow they go to Auburn and they either get beat or they just look like a shell of themselves. So it's something about this game, and it's always really intriguing to watch every year. So then at number 2, I put the Army-Navy game. Like Zach said, it has a whole week dedicated just to this game, which you were saying that you don't know if there are any other games played.
I knew. Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there aren't, like you said, there are no other games played during that week. Unfortunately, I feel like I feel like Air Force kind of gets excluded a little bit here when it comes to this game, because the Commander-in-Chief's trophy is fought between Army, Navy, and Air Force. And actually, in the all-time series between these 3 teams, Air Force actually has the best record when it comes to the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. But the Army-Navy game has always been the most important and the most watched out of these games. And it was nice that, I think one thing that put it up a little bit higher for me was that recently Army has finally started to get better, because Navy kind of dominated this game for a long time, and they were on like a really big winning streak, but thankfully in the past few years, Army has gotten it back together, and they've won, I think, like 3 out of the last 4, I think, have gone to Army. So it's getting to be a competitive ball game, and just the history behind it. So then at number 3, I have Ohio State versus Michigan. Definitely, if it hadn't been for the fact that this rivalry has been not competitive at all in the past, I mean, I looked it up, the statistic that in the last 16 seasons, Michigan's only won once, and Ohio State's won the last 8 in a row. So, unfortunately for Michigan, when it comes to their biggest and most bitter rival, they are just getting their butts whooped all over the place for that. So, had it not been for that, this probably would have been number 1 on my list. But Michigan's just been getting their butt whooped, and this game doesn't seem to mean as much as it used to. It still has a lot of history and a lot of hype around it, but Michigan really needs to start getting more results. Otherwise, this rivalry, like if we were to ever talk about this again, this would just keep falling down the list because it's, you can say it's a rivalry. It's kind of like the Pittsburgh Steelers Cleveland Browns rivalry in the NFL, where like the Steelers and Browns are supposed to be these big rivals, but the Steelers win 9 times out of 10. So it's like, can you really call it much of a rivalry if one team's winning all the time? So then I do have at number 4 the Oklahoma-Texas rivalry. This game, I'm not sure. Like Zach said that it kind of determines the Big 12. I don't think as much it does anymore because Texas has kind of had like these up and down seasons the past few years. But it's one of these rivalry games I've always liked the ones that go on neutral locations because the Alabama Auburn, Ohio State Michigan, Alabama LSU, those are all played. They switch stadiums, but like with the Georgia Florida one, the Oklahoma Texas one's always played at a neutral location, and it's really the highlight of the Big 12 season, which is what makes it so good because there's like Oklahoma and Oklahoma State and Texas and Texas Tech and some of these other, and Kansas State, but when you talk about the Big 12 schedule, the only game that anybody ever really looks forward to is the Oklahoma-Texas game because unfortunately for the Big 12, they're kind of overshadowed by the SEC and the Big 10 when it comes to big rivalry games. So, but this game's been going on forever. I mean, Oklahoma and Texas have been, they're right next to each other. They've been in the same conference forever, way back when. So, and it did used to be a bigger game in terms of like deciding more, but definitely has to be on the list though. Then with Alabama and LSU at number 5, I put this one down a bit lower on the list because while LSU and Alabama are both really good teams for most seasons, this game does have a bit more of the Ohio State Michigan feel to it in terms of dominance. Alabama, obviously last year LSU won. LSU dominated at the start. Alabama started to come back. It was a decent game, but for the most part, in the past 10, 11, 12 seasons, Alabama's dominated this game. I think LSU's only won once or twice in the past 10, 11, 12 years. So and I don't think it has as big of a history as, say, like Ohio State and Michigan. People don't look at the calendar and go, oh, Alabama, LSU, that's like, there's so much history in this game and blah, 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 blah. Like, they don't really see that as much as you do in like the Ohio State, Michigan, or the Army Navy game. So that's why I put that one down a little bit lower. Could definitely start going up if LSU can start winning more games in the future. I think that's unfortunately partly due. I'm going to probably make a lot of LSU fans mad here, but I feel like LSU is always one of the most overrated teams going into every season. Obviously this year they won the national championship, so good for them, but it seems like other than this season, this was like an exception. It seems like every year they go in, they think LSU is going to be this awesome team, and then they're not even there in the college football playoffs. So that's another reason why I have this game a little bit lower. Sorry, LSU fans, but your team is just a bit overrated most of the time. Not this season, though. I'll give you credit for this season. Then at number 6, I have the first new rivalry that Zach didn't talk about. It's the USC Notre Dame rivalry. This is another really old-timey historic rivalry. This has been going on forever, it feels like. And I think one of the reasons why I put this on here mostly is because Notre Dame, being an independent, they don't really have very many rivalries that they get to play every year. Because when you're in the same conference with another team, obviously you're going to end up playing them every year for the most part, especially if you're in the same division. You're going to play them every year. But Notre Dame is an independent, and they've got these small ties to the ACC, but they don't play any regular ACC games. And they used to have all these games that they played against Big Ten teams. Like they had a rivalry with Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, but they don't play those games every year anymore. That kind of got thrown to the wayside when the whole college football playoff system started. But there's one game that they do play every year against a major team. It's USC. They still play this game every single year. And it's a competitive game too. I mean, USC had its moments of dominance. Notre Dame's been winning quite a bit recently, but it's not a lopsided rivalry. It's a competitive rivalry, and both teams, it's it's Notre Dame's highlight of the season, and honestly, it's probably USC's highlight of the season. Even though they've got their Pac-12 rivalries with like UCLA and Washington State and all these other, and Stanford and Cal, they want to beat Notre Dame more than any other team, and Notre Dame wants to beat USC more than any other team. So I wanted to highlight that rivalry. Then I've got the Georgia-Florida game at number 7. Like Zach said, this rivalry it determines the SEC East, it seems like, for all the time now. Unfortunately, I know you guys wish that Tennessee would always be in that fight more recently, but for the time being, it's Georgia and Florida that determines the SEC East for the most part. So, and again, like I said before, neutral location. It's always fun having a neutral location game because it really does feel like the crowd at that point is 50-50. Even though when you have a big rivalry game, fans from the opposing team are going to come and probably fill up like 20-25%. But when you have a neutral location, it's 50-50 for the most part. So it makes it fun. Then at number 8, I have going with the only rivalry on any of these lists that is not a Division I rivalry. This is the only FCS rivalry on the list. It's Harvard and Yale, mainly because this is probably even more so than Ohio State, Michigan, even more so than Army, Navy, even more so than USC, Notre Dame. This is the most historic and most, I don't know if I should say oldest, but it feels like it's the oldest rivalry in all of college football, because when college football was just a wee tiny baby back in the late 1800s, Harvard and Yale were the two teams that would fight it out every year for the championship. Princeton was always kind of in there somewhere, but it was always Harvard and Yale, and these two teams were fighting it out, and they still obviously play each other every year in the Ivy League. And apparently the game's become a hotbed for protests too, just like this past year with climate change protesters protesting the game. And I'm not sure why the stadium didn't have lights on it, but so there was worry that the game was going to be have to end early because there were no lights on the stadium. That seems kind of weird. But yeah, it's just, this game, it represents everything about college football in many ways, in more ways than one. And I just couldn't see any way that I could keep this game off the list. So then I'm getting to my biases here. Number 9 at the bottom of my list, we got Duke versus UNC. Obviously, if this was a list about college basketball, this would definitely have an argument for being number 1. But the teams, because both these teams are every single year in college basketball, they're fighting it out to be the best team in the league, and they've won multiple national championships. But in football, they're definitely not the powerhouses in football that they are in college basketball. But I still had to put it on here because the hate is still there. You see the hate in basketball, but I went to a game recently at Keenan Memorial in Chapel Hill, and it was, thankfully for my sake, UNC dominated the game. It was 63-31 or something was the final score. But these teams still hate each other, and they still, they have the victory bell that they play for every year. And I always like how, because there are 2 other rivalries in college football that use the victory bell. I don't remember what the teams are. I know one of them is like Cincinnati and somebody, and I can't remember what the other one is, but this one's unique because the other victory bells are all they're painted. Like the Cincinnati one is a black and red victory bell, and the other one is painted some other color. But this victory bell, whichever team wins the rivalry game, they get to paint the victory bell that year. So whenever UNC wins, they get to spray paint it light blue, and then it stays light blue until Duke wins it back, and then Duke will spray paint it dark blue. So you always see it after the game whenever the one team will take it back. All the players have cans of spray paint, and they're just spray painting the trophies. So
that's great.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool
I like that.
An interaction with the trophy. So had to put that on there. And then finally at number 10, even more bias on my part, I had to include Appalachian State on this list, and there was no other rivalry for Appalachian State to put on here than their rivalry with Georgia Southern. The rivalry's name is called Deeper Than Hate, and I actually read an interesting stat about this game, that this game, they've been playing each other since they were in the FCS, since they were Division II teams. This is not a rivalry that started in Division I. It started way back in Division II. And the interesting stat that I read that no player, because they play each other every year, there's been no 4-year player where like one team has won 4 games in a row. So like if someone came in as a freshman and was there until they were a senior, there was never a time where like App State won 4 times in a row or Georgia Southern won 4 times in a row. That's never happened in the history of this rivalry game. So it just shows the competitiveness of this game, and especially now with both teams being Sun Belt Conference powerhouses and also being in the same division, it will usually determine the Sun Belt East who's going to win. And unfortunately for App State's sake, they have an even bigger reason to hate Georgia Southern because the past 2 seasons, you know, not this past season, but the season before, App State, it was the first time they'd ever been ranked in school history. You know, they got to number 25, like, oh, this is such a big accomplishment. Like, you know, we can take this, we can ride with this. And then the very next week, that feeling of accomplishment and success got taken away by Georgia Southern, and App State was never ranked again that season. And the same thing this season, when even though App State was 13-1, thankfully for us, we had a greater resume this year, so we were able to stay in the top 25. But there was some worry that halfway through the season we weren't even going to win the Sun Belt because, again, Georgia Southern somehow got in our way and beat us. And this year, what made it even more stinging this year was the previous year we lost at Georgia Southern. This year they came into Boone and beat us on Halloween night, and I don't even know what to say. That for some reason they beat us, and
I remember it was super cold that night too.
Oh my goodness! It was actually. There's only 2 home games that I've been to at App State that they've lost. One was to Wake Forest, and I'm not even going to talk about that game because our kicker completely blew that game for us. But this was the other game, and I remember like all the games up to this point that I'd watched at home, we've dominated because we're a really dominant team when it comes to playing against our conference. And you know, this was the first game that I went to, and like Zach said, to make matters worse, it was freezing. I mean, it was like sub 20 degrees. The wind chill was like in the negatives. It was half sleeting, half snowing. Like it was just horrible conditions to be at a football game. And on top of all that, they were just kicking our butts like completely. I mean, the score at the end was like 28-21, but the score really shouldn't have been like that. It should have been like 28-3 for Georgia Southern. We were just playing god awful in that game. So I definitely, I know that's a little bit of bias putting this on here because I know these guys would have never even thought to, and probably no one else would ever think to put this rivalry on here, but I felt that I had to include it on this list. So
all right, very good.
That's
before we move on, I got one question. Were you guys after you were ranked for the first time at number 25, were you guys saying we want Bama, we want Bama?
Well, actually,
were you guys
yeah.
saying that?
Oh, well, trust me, I've seen maybe not as much at that time because we weren't undefeated, but what made, like I said, going in this year, we were undefeated going into that game. We had a lot of high hopes that we were going to go undefeated, that we were going to go 14-0, and that we were like 8-0 going into that game. And yeah, there were people at my school that had signs that were like, we want Bama. And I'm thinking in my head, like, no, we don't want Alabama. We just could kill it if we played Alabama.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were riding high, man. And
Yeah,
they tore us down for the second year in a row.
Yeah. All right, Eric, tell us about your list here for a little bit.
Yeah, I'll go quicker.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking for a while, and then plus I'm like the least knowledgeable college football guy on the panel. So if you listen to this and you think my list sucks, like, I don't care. So
Eric will rant about you.
Yeah. But like Zach and Connor, I've got Alabama and Auburn number 1, even though I hate Alabama with every fiber of my being. This has always been one of my favorite games to watch. It's, towards the very end of the season, it almost always has a big impact on how the season turns out, as the guys already said. So I really enjoy watching this game. And then Army-Navy, while this one might not have the hatred to it as some of these other ones, I put it at number 2 because, one, with the history of it, and then as Zach mentioned, it's people that are defending the country. Like, it's really cool. I like that it has its own week where they get the spotlight on them. I like that a lot. And as Connor said too, it's also helped that Army has been getting better over the years, which has made it more competitive game, and which makes it even more exciting to watch. So, and then at number 3, going with the Red River Showdown. This is one I contemplated putting it a little bit lower. But at the same time, throughout my lifetime, this has always been a really competitive rivalry. And like the Florida Georgia, which I do have that one later on my list, but like that one, I enjoy the neutral site rivalries. I always think it's really cool when at some point during the game you see like the Goodyear blimp and you see the crowd, and you can see it split down the line, like half red, half orange, or whatever, half red, half blue for the Florida Georgia. It always just looks really cool seeing a neutral site and that there's no true home field advantage. So I really enjoy that a lot. Number 4, Ohio State, Michigan. Same reason as Connor as to why I don't have this one higher. If I was doing these rankings when I was a kid, this would have probably been, even though I'm an SEC bias as a Tennessee fan, this would have been my number 1 with the hatred these two teams have for each other and the intensity of it. But like Connor said, though, it doesn't feel as intense when the same team is winning every time. So, and especially lately, like most of the time, it's not even though Ohio State's dominated the rivalry, most of the time it's not even like, oh, Ohio State's won a bunch in a row, but they were all really close games. Like most of them have been blowouts. So Michigan's going to need to get it together and start playing better and winning some of these for me to move this rivalry up higher on my list. It's one I would like to be higher on my list because like Alabama and Auburn, it happens, more at the end of the season, and it should have a big effect on the conference standings, but right now it just isn't. So I had contemplated putting that one a little lower as well, but just because of the history of it, I kept it at 4. Number 5, former state. I used to live in Florida. This was a big rivalry, even though just like Alabama, I hate Florida with every fiber in my being as well. I always got excited for this one just because, between people in my school and people in my youth group that I was in at my church, shout out Lakeshore Methodist, shout out to them. Y'all know who you are, but I always enjoyed watching, my friends, and it was pretty evenly split between my friends who were Gator fans and who were Florida State fans, and I still see a little bit of camaraderie on Facebook or stuff. But I always enjoyed watching my friends go at it with each other with this rivalry. Of course, I always rooted for Florida State since I hate Florida so much, but I enjoy the local camaraderie there with that one. And then Alabama LSU, I kind of have here at number 6. I have for similar reasons as Connor as to why I don't have this one higher up there with Alabama and Auburn. I also give LSU a lot of credit for the way they played last year, being so beast and winning the national championship and everything. But this is another one, though, kind of like Ohio State, Michigan, where for the most part it's been Alabama's rivalry for the most part. So I couldn't put it higher, but it is another one, though, that like every year I feel like I always look forward to it. And then coming in at number 7, also pretty much in agreement here with Connor, USC Notre Dame. I don't really like either of these teams, so my interest in it isn't necessarily as super high as some of these other ones, but at the same time, when I have watched these games, I've enjoyed them. As Connor said, it's been a pretty competitive rivalry and everything. And then at number 8, another local one for me, the Florida-Georgia rivalry with the game being played in Jacksonville every year. I didn't quite have as many friends that were Georgia fans. It was more dominated by Gator fans, but at the same time, I always enjoyed watching it and knowing that the game was being played just minutes from where I live. So really great rivalry there. And kind of like I mentioned with Oklahoma, Texas, I really enjoy the neutral site rivalry of it. And as Zach said, the hatred between these two teams is very real. They can't stand each other. And then Notre Dame, Michigan, while they haven't played as many times lately, they had a few years off. They've still played several times in the last 20 years. So I don't have this one up as high on my list because of them not playing every year. But this is a really fun rivalry. And this one, at least unlike Michigan, Ohio State, has at least been more even throughout their last decade of playing.
Michigan can actually win some of these games.
Yeah, Michigan's won it a few times, so that's good. Lastly, to round out my top 10, I didn't see Nate's list yet, but I know Connor and Zach didn't have this one in there. But Cal and Stanford, I don't get to see this one as much because of it being a rivalry so far out west. I don't always get to see these games, but I figured I had to put it on my list because this is another rivalry that's been going on for quite a while. And obviously, there was the big incident a long time ago where there was the final play and the marching band thought the game was over and the band was running out on the field and the commentator.
The band's on the field.
It's just like one of the craziest moments in college football history. So I felt like I had to put that one in there. But yeah, that's going to do it for my top 10. So Nate, what you got?
All right. So pretty much the same as everyone's my number one pick, the Iron Bowl. Other three guys kind of explained everything you know about this rivalry. Like, it's basically the biggest game on the regular season calendar. Aside from like the conference championships and the bowl games, like this is what everyone pretty much watches for, regardless of who your favorite team is. So that's a pretty clear choice there at number one. Number two, I was a little bit higher on the Ohio State Michigan game than the other guys were, just because like the tradition of it, and it hasn't been as competitive in recent years. But it's definitely one that I still get excited for to tune in and watch. Just like the whole atmosphere and the environment and the history of it.
I think that Michigan might have a chance this year.
Yeah.
Every year they say that.
Every year they say that, yeah. But who knows? But it's definitely one that I think I just appreciate the tradition of a lot personally. That's why it's number two for me. Just one of like the iconic kind of rivalries of the game. Number three, I've got Army Navy. Like you guys said, it's kind of more than like college football. Obviously, like these players are going to go on to defend our country and do huge things in that area. So you kind of can't really go wrong like rooting for either team. It's just like a big game. It's the only game of the week, so it's really like a huge game. Just sit down and watch. So that's my number three pick. Number four, I've got Harvard and Yale. The game. I know it's a little bit higher than some of the other rivalries, but it's not really televised, which I think is the biggest thing it's got going against it. Obviously, like these other games, like you tune into every year, and this is like a staple of the college football schedule. But I gave this rivalry props just for the tradition of it. Their first meeting was in 1875, and to still be playing the game today is pretty like cool to me. I don't know, I just think it's really neat, and out of all I think it's as competitive as some of these other rivalries, just because the Ivy League doesn't participate in like the playoffs for the FCS or anything like that. So that really is like those team Super Bowls. So it's definitely a big game and deserves some credit. Number five, I've got Alabama and LSU. This one is like, it's a game that I wanted to put higher just because like some of the recent things, when you really think about it, Alabama has dominated the series, but I gave it points for the last couple of years. They've produced some pretty solid entertaining meetings between these two teams, and plus the history they've got with that year back in, I think it was 2009, when they played twice and it was like, quote, the game of the century. So there's definitely been some huge moments in this rivalry, and it's one that really goes a long way towards that, and the Iron Bowl go towards determining the SEC West, or they have recently. So that's my number 5 pick. Number 6, I've got Florida State. Just a huge in-state rivalry, and especially like Zach said, growing up here, like everyone, regardless of if they went to those schools or if their parents went, you're gonna be wearing one of those teams' colors come that week.
Yeah, and even too, if you're a Georgia fan, you're rooting hard for Florida State. If you're a Miami fan, you're rooting hard for Florida too. So it involves everybody. So
yeah, and especially like when you look at the players, most of Florida and Florida State's rosters, I would say about 70% all come from parts of Florida. So I'm sure they've all played each other, in high school. So these guys know each other, and it's kind of personal in that regard as well. So definitely a big game there. Number 7, I've got the River Shootout, Oklahoma versus Texas. That's another one that's a big deal. I had to get the Big 12 in here somehow, but that's always an entertaining matchup. It's usually been pretty high scoring, so it's definitely an entertaining one to watch on TV. And I think it is cool, like Georgia, Florida later on this list, that it's at a neutral site. Definitely gives it like a cool atmosphere and big game vibe to it. And number 8, I've got the Holy War, BYU versus Utah. Kind of like what Zach said, this was one that it's a little bit slept on because it is out west. It's 2 teams that haven't really been like national title contenders of late, and it also takes place one of the first few weeks of the season, so it's not rivalry week or anything like that. But it definitely deserves its credit as well. It's a really long-standing rivalry. Definitely some huge passion in there, and definitely just a big game that deserves some more recognition. Number 9, I've got Florida, Georgia. Like the other guy said, kind of went over this one pretty well, but it's just a big event, especially I'm from Jacksonville as well, so every year it's a huge thing on the calendar for everybody here. And then last and 10th, I went with a little bit of bias here. I had to throw the war on I-4 in there, UCF versus USF. Definitely a newer rivalry. It's only we've only met like 10 to 15 times, something like that. And it hasn't been the most competitive, but I think there was that crazy game. I know Zach was there with me.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, in 2017. Definitely one of the best football games I've seen. And I think this is one that's going to be start becoming bigger in future years. Like, takes place on Black Friday every year, so it's one of the few college football games because most of the rivalry games are that Saturday or they're on Thanksgiving, so it always gets a big TV slot. So I think it's one that hopefully stays competitive, and it could be a pretty big rivalry every year, more in like a national sense soon.
Were you getting like super nervous in that 2017 game? Because I know that UCF was like trying to go undefeated there. Were you like getting really nervous that they were going to get handed their first loss?
That one was intense because it looked like USF had it a few times. Like the last,
it was
like,
crazy,
20
man.
minutes.
Well, it was funny. It was funny because I remember for that game actually, because you two were at it, but I was actually in Florida that weekend for Thanksgiving. I was in Jacksonville actually, and that game was on TV. I was like, I wonder if because I figured Nate probably went to it because it was in Orlando. But I was like, I wonder if, and Zach told me that he was going to it too. So I was like, man, I wonder how they're enjoying this game because this is a close game.
It was that was a great game. Yeah,
especially since UCF was in they were trying to vie for that spot in the college football playoff, and it was like if they lose this game, then any hope of that is like completely gone. Like it's a slim hope anyway, but like they can't lose this game.
And also too, people forget this, but if USF had won that, they would have won the American East.
Right.
That was at stake.
Auburn then.
Yeah, that was at stake. I don't know if they would have ended up beating Memphis or not, but
that's true.
But yeah, I mean, they would have at least prevented UCF from winning the American, which was still to be decided by that week. So even though they had lost like 1 or 2 games, they were still ranked. Both teams were ranked. So yeah, that was definitely the highlight of this series. But I give the War on I-4 props for their name. naming because
Yeah.
that's a pretty clever name. Because I-4, the major thoroughway runs through both the cities, so it's a good rivalry. I thought about including it, but I was like, Nate'll probably have it, so I'll let him talk about it.
A little bit biased.
Yeah, just a little bit. All right, so we're going to talk about some snacks now. Break out, everybody. Just go, if you're watching or listening to this, go get your favorite snack because this might make you hungry. It's a little warning here. Go get a snack to eat.
Yeah, pause the video. Pause the video.
All right, Eric, tell us about your top 10 snacks.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go in the opposite order here. I'm gonna go from number 10 to number 1. So, okay, there it goes. I didn't see the share screen for a second. I was like, I'm going to bust out my list. Okay. So coming in at number 10 here, I've got the great Macho Man Randy Savage holding up a pack of Slim Jims. Obviously, since I've got them at number 10, they're not my favorite snack, but I used to eat these all the time. I don't eat them quite as much now, but Slim Jims used to be a big staple for me, and like I said, I still enjoy them from time to time. So, got them at number 10, and then number 9. These have been a little more recent for me. I know Zach and I, Zach, Connor, and I were kind of coming up with our list together, and Zach and I had a disagreement on this one, but
Zach was like, "Ew."
I can't stand those, man.
Yeah. So, I went with Ruffles cheddar and sour cream. So Zach, you said you don't like sour cream, like anything in snacks.
I'm not big on the flavoring combination or just eating them out raw. Like, I'm not a big fan of it. So.
It's crazy
when you put them in a chip, like, I'll pass.
It's crazy because I don't really care for like real sour cream, but like these cheddar and sour cream are pretty good. You taste more of the cheddar flavor than you do the sour cream flavor, but I am a pretty big fan of those. But I got other chips on here, and then coming in at number 8, I've got Cool Ranch Doritos. I debated on if I should only put one kind of Dorito, but between the nacho cheese and the Cool Ranch, I mean, if you like Doritos, I mean, like these two are the biggest staples, and so I had to have Cool Ranch Doritos on my list. And then at number 7, I went with peanut butter Twix. Probably one of my greatest moments in life, which I know most people that like Twix, you're gonna say the caramel are the better ones, which is what Susan used to do. But I actually converted Susan from the traditional caramel Twix to the peanut butter Twix. She likes them better, and
I've never seen one of these.
I've never seen them either.
I don't know how, because when I lived in Jacksonville, I used to get them all the time, and then here in Texas, I see them quite a bit. So you're just not looking hard enough, guys. Maybe next family trip I'll have to bring.
I didn't even know Twix made multiple flavors, to be honest.
Neither did I.
Yeah, they actually have a white chocolate caramel one too. Like if you like white chocolate, you might like that. But
Eric knows everything about Twix, guys.
Clearly, Zach and I have missed something.
Yeah. Y'all obviously are look at that picture right there. Take a mental screenshot of that and go look for that because it's really good. Between the softness of the chocolate and the peanut butter and then the like crunchy of the cookie, it's such a great combo. And there's a lot of these like dessert type of snacks on here that I'll have. I love all of them with milk. So,
I have a question for you, Eric. So I see when I'm reading this label, it says creamy peanut butter. Do they also make a crunchy peanut butter Twix?
I have not seen that. Much I have
Eric
not
has
seen.
Not seen a potential flavor for Twix.
Well, the crazy thing is Twix isn't even my favorite candy bar, but that's why it's number 7. But at the same time, just those peanut butter Twix are just anything chocolate and peanut butter together is I love it. So number 6, I've got chocolate chip cream pies. Now what I normally get are the Little Debbie brands, which they're not as good as like what you see in this picture if you're looking on YouTube, but if you can find a way to like get them like this or make them yourself where you can get a little more icing in there. And with like a real chocolate chip cookie, oh my God, so good. But I normally eat the Little Debbie's because that's the only way I can get them, which are still good, but not as good as the style in this picture. But another sweet treat for me that I love. Now, number 5, we also had some debate about this one when I was putting them in my list. Which one, Zach or Connor, which one of you was it said you didn't like the like mint ice?
don't.
Connor, you don't. Okay.
But you were saying that it's like a thin mint cookie. It's not like mint chocolate. It's not like mint chocolate chip ice cream.
It's not like, because I guess most people when they think of the like mint ice cream, you think of the green, like the mint chocolate chip. You think of like that, but it's more of a, like I said, it's more of a peppermint, and the chocolate part is like Oreo cookie, not just like little bits of chocolate chip. So it's not quite as overpowering on the mint. I do like mint chocolate chip too, but that didn't crack my top 10 though. This one from Ben and Jerry's, this mint chocolate cookie, unbelievably good.
They know how to make ice cream. It's just expensive.
Yes, yeah, they do. Ice cream's not my biggest snack. That's why I've only got one in the top 10. But at the same time, like when I do go for ice cream, like that's the one I'm gonna get. And the number 4, I get this at the restaurant I work at all the time, and I
surprised you haven't gotten tired of it yet.
I would do it every day if I could, but chips and queso, oh man, especially the queso that my restaurant serves, it is so good. And just with, the traditional chips that you would eat with it. But man, if one time I worked a party, like obviously this was way before the Corona stuff, but I worked this big party and they ordered this like big ass bowl. Oh, sorry for the language there. They ordered this huge bowl of queso with all their food and stuff. And then like barely anybody like put any on their plate. And so at the end, we're like, do you guys want us to like pack this up for you to take with you? And they're like, no, just do whatever with it. So I just went and got a like 32-ounce cup and just like loaded it up and took it home. That was a great night.
Everybody's like, no, we don't care. And Eric's like, mine.
Oh no, other people wanted it too. I had to fight people off to make sure I got my fair portion. But the people that hosted the party for some reason didn't want it. So like all the coworkers and I were just like, boom, like we were loading it up. But so huge fan there. But moving on, number 3. So I could take like 10 Reese's Peanut Butter Cups products and like just make them all be a top 10. But I went with my favorite one, which surprisingly is not the traditional peanut butter cups. The Reese's Sticks are my favorite Reese's product. They are unbelievably good with the wafer crisp cookie and the peanut butter in the middle. It's almost like a Nutty Bar from Little Debbie if you've had those, but I like the flavor of these better. And just I love Reese's. Okay, number 2. To the other Doritos, nacho cheese, the classic Dorito. These are by far my favorite chips. I've had moments though where I've eaten them too much and briefly got a little tired of them, but all throughout time, I got Zach hooked on these a long time ago.
I'll tell that story later.
Zach will tell that story when it gets to it. And I picked this picture since the amazing Gal Gadot was on it with Wonder Woman 84 getting ready to come out. So I specifically picked that picture. And then number 1, this would probably, if you don't know me, this would probably come as a surprise because with everything else I'd mentioned, you'd be like, this is your number 1. But fudge rounds from the Little Debbie brand are my favorite snack of all time. If my friends the Harrisons happen to listen to this, they'll know. They told me one time that I think I ate like 5 or 6 in a night one time at their house. And they were like, I bet if there was a fight to the death in the tournament and the sole survivor got to eat the last fudge round in the history of Earth, you would enter and win somehow. I said, I probably would. Fudge rounds, just the chocolate on the outside, the chocolate icing in the middle. It's just so great. And then I will say though, you have to pair it with an ice cold glass of milk, as you can see in that picture there. That is my own personal Jaguars glass there. I took that picture myself.
The first user photo that we have on here.
I did not Google search this picture. I took it myself. Very proud moment. So there's my top 10 snacks, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Kind of like my college football list, though. If you disagree, I'm not going to care. You won't be able to. This is obviously an all biased list anyway, so I respect other people's top 10s, but if you hate on mine, too bad. I don't care.
All right. A lot of I switched the screen now to Nate's. A lot of different colors pop up on Nate's screen. So Nate, tell us about your top 10 here.
All right. So, yeah, I got some interesting picks here. I'm gonna go 1 to 10. So I don't get mixed up. But I've got chili cheese Fritos at number 1. Those are, I don't know why, those have always been like my favorite chips. Those and like the forgetting the other one now, but those have been my favorite pretty much forever. I like chili in real life, and you put the regular Fritos in it, and that's a good combo. And the flavoring on these is like really good. Tastes pretty much like real chili, I feel like, and I could eat like a whole bag of these like at once. Like they're great. Then number 2, I've got chocolate chip cookies. Pretty much in general, those are my favorite. But especially if you make them, obviously homemade, right out of the oven. Like I don't know what kind of other sweet really beats that. So that's my number 2 pick. Number 3, I've got guacamole. The chips are, included with that. You gotta have something to dip in them. But I think that's another thing I could just put out there and I could just eat, like take chip after chip and just keep going in on it. Like that, and at a restaurant, like it's so bad. Like I'll just go crazy and guac. So that's that's my number 3.
You don't fill up on bread. You fill up on guac.
Oh yeah, that's bad. They keep like refilling
that guac
the chips.
looks good too, man. Like
That's
that picture of guac looks good. Did you make that or something?
No, I just searched guacamole on Google, but I gotta go back and find that recipe though, because it was like one of those ones that was like make your own guacamole.
Yeah.
I was about to say,
Yeah, man,
I was about to say, if that was his picture, like, man, that's the best, like, stock-looking photo.
Yeah.
Like, you taking a photo.
I was sticking my hand there, and I was just balance the chip and have my phone, taking the picture. No, but yeah, that's a good one. We actually grow some avocados. We have a tree in our backyard, so we do make our own homemade guacamole once in a while. Once you get a few avocados in every year, so that's good as well.
Be over to your house when you do that next time, Nate.
Yeah, next fall for sure. Like definitely when they come in, we don't get that many, which is kind of a bummer. But we usually get 2 or 3 at a time. We can make a nice bowl. But yeah, so that's my 3rd pick. 4th, I've got brownies. That's another one of those sweets that is probably my favorite. Like outside of, I didn't put ice cream on here. I didn't think to do it because I didn't really feel like it was a snack per se. Like I wouldn't just sit down and eat ice cream, but like as a dessert, that's definitely top tier.
Trust me, some people do.
Yeah, yeah.
Me.
When you get those, I was saying when you get those like Ben and Jerry's cups or like the Haagen-Dazs cups or whatever.
Yeah, that theme parks.
Yeah, but yeah, I got brownies on here. Is another sweet, I guess. That's more like I consider it more of a snack than a dessert, I guess. But that's another good one. My 5th pick is definitely gonna raise some eyebrows a little bit, but I'm gonna explain it here. I put French's, like the fried onions that you get, and you like put them on usually like a green bean casserole or some other kind of food. And I don't know if y'all have done this, but like my mom like makes green bean casserole for like Thanksgiving and Christmas or whatever, and like we buy these to put on top. And I'll just be like sitting there like eating them straight out of the thing. Like, I could honestly buy one of these
My
things.
sister does that.
I don't know. It's like it's a lot like onion rings. Honestly, like they're a little bit more like crispy fried, but like
It says it right there too, crispy fried.
Yeah.
yeah, like it's just like the texture is like more crunchy, but like it's basically the closest thing you can get to onion rings without going to a restaurant and buying some. You know what I mean? Like I definitely give it a try sometime. That sounds weird, but that's my weird my one weird like snacking crave, I guess. So number 6, I got buffalo chicken dip. Like guacamole, like that's another one that when there's a Super Bowl party or something, like if someone makes that, like that's another thing I can sit there and like shovel chips forever until like someone stops me.
Nate, stop.
Just love the texture and the yeah, like the texture and the it's like buffalo wings kind of flavor, and yeah, it's just great. What number is this? 7. I've got Thin Mints. Probably that or Samoas are probably my favorite Girl Scout cookies, but I'll give the edge to Thin Mints here because that's usually what my family gets whenever they come around, I guess. That's usually what we end up with, but that's definitely one you can eat a whole sleeve of those. Like, they're like light, so you can eat it. You know what I mean? Like, you eat other sugary stuff, and like you eat a little bit, and your stomach kind of feels like full. But these, like, I don't know, you can eat a bunch of them and not really feel too bad. I don't feel like. So that's definitely a plus. Number 8, I have Pop-Tart, specifically s'mores. That's kind of my go-to flavor. All of them are pretty good. Not just like at breakfast time, like any time of day, like it's a nice little snack. Throw it in the toaster and get it all like melty and all that. It's definitely especially the s'mores, you get that like all melty and warm from the toaster. That's a top tier snack right there. Then 9 and 10. 9, I've got Tostitos Hint of Lime variety. It's a good dipping option, but by themselves, it's pretty solid like snack there. Pretty good chip. I like the lime flavoring. Like, it's not too much, I don't feel like, but it's just the right amount of like distinct flavor, I guess. So those definitely hit pretty good when I'm in the right mood for them. And then number 10 is Cheetos, like the crunchy kind. It's definitely like a really solid chip option. Really can't go wrong with them. I like the puffs too, but crunchy is just as good. So that's one I went with. But yeah, that's my top 10 there.
Very good top 10, Nate.
I like
a lot of fun.
Yes.
I'll comment one thing about the Pop-Tarts, man. Those s'mores Pop-Tarts, I lived off those at school lunch, man. When every other day I would buy those in the lunch line, man. That was like if I got anything other than like a meal, I'd get the s'mores Pop-Tarts, man. I lived on those things.
Unfortunately for me, like I used to love those too, but for me, I've just eaten so many of them that I've unfortunately got tired of them.
Aw.
Yeah, that's why I gotta space some of these snacks out.
Yeah.
I can't have them every day.
Yeah.
I want to put myself out.
On the list,
All
I've
right.
never had buffalo chicken dip, but that looks really good. I'm gonna have to find a way to try that sometime. So,
Good.
future top 10 snacks episode, that might be in there. I don't know.